Hello and welcome to another episode of History Fuzz. This is our second live stream in videos that are going to be supporting the initial documentary we put out, Ice Age Temple Discovered Older Than Göbekli Tepe. Quite a controversial piece, it turns out. We've got a fair amount of supporters and detractors. But what we're going to do in this episode is look closer at the comparative carvings and sculptures in Fontainebleau Forest Park, south of Paris. But before we kick off, I'll be using 2 or 3 images, other people's materials. So I'd like to read out my YouTube disclaimer for educational purposes. This video is for educational purposes and informational purposes only. It may include materials protected by copyright, used under the Fair Use Doctrine, Section 107 of the Copyright Act, which follows for commentary, criticism, research, and teaching. All rights remain with their respective owners, who I have credited within the slideshow. And if you believe your material has been unfairly used, please contact us directly, which means don't give me a copyright strike. We're not making coin on this. We're using it for educational purposes. So, on that note, now that we've read our disclaimer, I'm going to bring in my friend and colleague and co-host in the show, the search for these Ice Age artifacts. And while we say Charles Darwin was standing on the shoulders of giants, those giants themselves were indeed standing on the shoulders of Jay Parker. Hello, Jay.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Ash. Thanks for
Nice
letting me join you today, man. It's a pleasure.
Indeed. So what we'll do is we'll bring to the stage our slideshow, and we'll begin by doing a quick introduction of what Fontainebleau is. While our documentaries focus on the archaeology of Colombia, at the end of the show, or at the end of that last film, we presented evidence of similar stonework appearing 80 miles south of Paris in Fontainebleau Forest Park. This is a vast, I think somewhere between 80 and 100 hectares of an ancient hunting landscape in which archaeologists have found rock shelters, petroglyphs, pictograms, and carved megafauna sculptures dating back as far as 44,000 BC and being updated and altered and advanced all the way through to the Bronze Age. So there's 44,000 years of history there. Our claim, or our dating for the site we found in Colombia, is between 10 and 11,000 BC, but because there's older archaeology evidence in Colombia, and because the sculptures were slightly higher than the Paleolithic Humboldt line, we suggest somewhere in that 10,000 to 13,000 region band. So what we're going to show today are petroglyphs, pictograms, and animal sculptures from that same younger, driest geological time period. Let's move on to our first slide. To give a background for those who haven't watched the documentary or the live stream, in a nutshell, for the last 7 years, Jay and I have been exploring a very important altitude in Colombia, which is representative of Ice Age cultures that existed in the Bogota savanna between 10 and 11,000 BC at sites such as Ilabra, Tibito, Tequendama, and Pubenza. These are all dated between 9,000 and 14,000 BC. So the altitude that those sites are on is currently a hilltop. It was the shoreline of the Paleolithic Humboldt, but we're exploring the hills on the ancient lagoon altitude. Ilabra, to give you a background, is located 30 kilometers from the site that we rediscovered. This here presents 52 cave structures, small rock shelters, embellished with pictograms such as this example of the squatting man on the right, which is found all over the world, contemporary with this site at Ilabra, and red pictograms. And those caves and shelters are sort of about 10 meters off the ground, but right there where the mouse is just now, that key rock shelter was lagoon site, 10,400 BC, which the zoological assemblages that were discovered there have been dated to. They found in Tibito next door circles of mastodon bones, offering evidence that there was perhaps a ritualization of the giant creatures that these cultures hunted. Jay and myself identified 5 rock shelters on a hill in the Bogota Savannah, unexplored up until now, but very, very close to Labra, Tibito, and Tequendama, central to all 3. These rock shelters match the size and the depth of the rock shelters discovered at Labra and Tibito. Inside shelter 2, we identified shelter 2 is our first ancient artistic discovery, if you like. Jay, I'm going to shut up there. Hang on a second. Look at that. I took up a solid 4 minutes, but I want you to maybe talk us around this pictogram and what sort of feedback we've had and what we think and what we now don't think. Go for it.
Okay, man. Thanks, Ashley. This pictogram was found inside one of the rock shelters, as Ashley said, along with other artistic interpretations as well that I'm sure we'll look at soon. As you can see, it's red and black, which generally means ochre and red ochre and carbon. From the form of the pictogram, it's clearly a mammal. It's got 2 legs at the front, 2 legs at the back, a head and a tail. What the debate is what kind of mammal is it? Looking at the snout at the front, it's very elongated. And it's got a very bulbous, rounded body and a high tail at the back and some short, stumpy-ish legs. Now, relating it and putting it into context with the other sites that are there and the finding of the bones, the ritualistic use of the bones and the time period, we've suggested, and it's been suggested by a few people, not just myself and Ashley, that this could be an interpretation of what is called a Mastodon, which is a type of, it's from the same genus as the mammoth and these kind of things. It would have been a smaller version of the mammoths, the giants that would have roamed across Europe, and perhaps suggestively that due to the island life that it had, it could have become even smaller. We don't know. Looking at this pictogram, other people have suggested, first of all, perhaps a pig or a boar, but that would be more consistent with a more modern time period.
There were no pigs here in the the pigs came with the Spanish in the 16th century.
Quite correct, Ashley. And I don't think there are any other Muisca interpretations of pigs or wild boars or anything like that. There was something similar here, which is I forget what it's called. It's like a very small kind of pig, but they're from the Amazon. They're from the Amazon. They wouldn't, as far as I know, have been around this area. The size of it as well, the proportions and the dimensions of it suggest that it is perhaps a larger animal. Great. Someone has also suggested, due to the what appears to be like a horn at the top, that it may be some kind of prehistoric rhinoceros type creature, which also kind of puts it back to that time period around the time of the Mastodon and the time period, the Younger Dryas that we're suggesting.
The only trouble being, again, there were no rhinoceroses in South America. So I think the bulk of the feedback we've had is absolutely it's Mastodon, not mammoth, not a woolly-haired Colombian mammoth from North America, but this Mastodon. And guess what? What species of Mastodon was found at Tibito? Mastodon bones. Yeah. So one of the researchers we sent this out to used an application. It's going to be familiar to everybody out there into archaeology. It's known as D-Stretch. D-Stretch is an app that you download onto your iPhone. I think it's an iPhone only at the moment. But what it does is it provides you with the second best thing to a high spectrum visual scan. What it does is you can set it to enhance red coloration. So this researcher who supplied this suggested we should look for deterioration or perhaps different colorations that are beyond visible spectrum, and that maybe perhaps enabling us to better date it. This is what he produced. This is all the red accentuated, which we think is red ochre, and the carbon in the middle. And of course, contemporaneous with this in Labra, across the valley, black carbon and red ochre pictograms. The question we're going to ask for feedback on is, Which one of these two circles do you think is the eye? I personally believe it's this black, the one that's been blackened to stand out with the white. Jay, you're kind of thinking it's perhaps the circle here with all these lines coming out from it, yeah? Which is a definite deliberation.
Before, after seeing this and what was done to this, I think it's quite clear that the eye is the black dot. It's been specifically made to stand out. And the red form, the red coloring has been used to form like the outlying shape, and the other details have kind of been marked out with the black.
Yeah. This here fascinates me, where there's a break in the red and there's a deliberation in black, and I'm going to revert to it again with that tail point hooked up. It's very much like what large mammals do when they're giving birth, recreating. And that's how I see that, because this is a very deliberate bulbous body, as you say, but this here's anomalous, this thing that's pushing the tail up and out. I'm only saying that as well because I know in France, not in Fontainebleau that we're about to come on to, but in the Lascaux cave, there's images of mammoths that are perceived as giving birth, because it's that big moment leading to fertility and sustained hunting. Yeah, when the mammoths give birth,
it's kind of a completion of the cycle.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be fallacy to assume that these hunter-gatherers in that 10,000, 14,000-year-old period, you see the television and documentary recreations of bands of 60 hunters with spears. I bet you they didn't touch a pregnant mammoth. I bet you it was they would have known. Yeah. There would have been a sacred element to the pregnant mammal that sustained the hunting, and especially when that change of climate was happening at that time and they were watching the numbers dwindle. They aren't stupid. They know that their hunting had an effect as much as the environment. Yeah. And I just so we'll move on, Jay, but I wanted to introduce everyone to this pictogram because it establishes everything else they're about to see in archaeological context. Let's look at the petroglyphs that were found below the mammoth on the left in Colombia, comparatively with those found in the Fontainebleau rock shelters in France, dated to between 10 and 15,000 years old. Some of the Fontainebleau examples might be as old as 44,000 years old. But, Jake, do you want to talk around visual similarities and aesthetics that you find striking there between the two sites?
Okay. Anyone looking at this can see the similarities between them. The triangles are the standout shapes. Both of them have the squares, they have the parallel lines, but it's the triangle that stands out. And the triangle is a very unnatural shape. It's I hate to repeat myself, but it's clearly man-made. Mother Nature did not do these. What they were trying to express, what they were trying to communicate, that's beyond our possible imaginations at the moment. What is undeniable is there are definite, distinct similarities between both of these. If you can look at the one on Fontainebleau, you can see on the left-hand corner there is like a grid, as Ashley calls it, a tic-tac-toe board, like a noughts and crosses.
Oh, that's the next slide. Let's skip to that. Look, oh no, one moment, we'll come back to that one. Shit, look at that. I'm ruining everything. Go on, carry on.
Calm down. You've got the grid with the squares on it, and lo and behold, here in Colombia, we have the same grid formation with the same squares on it. The grids gradually come down to triangles, and lo and behold, in Colombia, at the end of the squares on the grid, they come down to triangles. We also see these triangles close between two parallel lines. Lo and behold, in Fontainebleau, we're seeing the same thing. Now, what they were trying to express is a guess, but are they trying to express the same thing? Are they leaving this for someone to be able to come along and read, or is it pure artistic interpretation of what is around them and their environment or something like that? I would say by the complexity of it and the extensity of it, that it is some form of communication, that someone is supposed to come along and look at this and be able to take out some kind of information. Maybe albeit the simplest form of information, but it seems to be more elaborate than any of the other
Okay.
petroglyphs or paintings or anything like that we're seeing.
So while I agree with you saying, you said two things there. You said it's hard to know what they were expressing and hard to know what they meant. So
Yes.
see, as far as the expression one goes, let me have a go at this. Because there's parallel lines, they had an awareness of symmetry. Because there's parallel angled lines, they knew how to bisect perpendicular angled lines within a vertical boundary. That's known in modern church building or tiling as tessellation. How to fill a space most economically with either the triangle, hexagon, or the square and octagon. So it's actually expressing, not advanced because everyone's going to go Hancock, but it's expressing a pretty solid structured awareness of geometry, proportion, and ratio and design, even though we don't know what it was they were perhaps recording. And also underline all that I've said is, in a chaotic, mehemic environment where you're taking your life in your hands every day, the climate's swinging all around you, to achieve linearity or straightness is again such an abstraction from the chaotic world they lived in. So it's almost a striving towards bringing order into chaos, isn't it?
It definitely shows some kind of order, some kind of sequence. So it shows the symmetry. Now, if we're looking at similar, maybe a similar comparative thing today would perhaps be what we see as a Sumerian text, Chinese texts, and things like that, where they're also enclosing within a certain space and utilizing that space to express the most information possible within that limited space. Here we're seeing them closing off spaces with these parallel lines. They look like pages and perhaps continuations of information with the parallel lines separating the blocks. Whether they're showing a visual thing to follow or it's something to actually come along and read, the difference perhaps between reading a book and an instruction manual.
One sense you left out there was, and I was thinking about this recently, is you're right about visual, but what about auditory? Because see, if you had nothing more than a wooden stick and rubbing it along those, it's going to act like a xylophone. You know, you see the frog noise machines that are just a block with chirps in it. So maybe it had an auditory value as well.
That's an interesting point. That's something perhaps we could look into.
Well, it takes a little more than a stick over the thing, but every one of these pattern blocks, like the ones in Colombia on the left, are suited for rubbing. You know, you can imagine what would happen if you rubbed a pencil over it. The noise that
would make a different noise, and the different sizes and different depths would make different tones, as does an instrument today.
That's of course, we're not saying it is that. We're just bringing in head blasts, anything that might be in the heads of us or the audience by saying stuff like that.
It's something that's worth exploring, I'd say.
Yeah.
We could try it. But looking at it visually, what else could that be? I mean, the way it's so organized and separated, like you would read something from the top to the bottom or across like that. Maybe in my opinion, and as I said in the film, taken into context, their lifestyle, the animals, the climate, and things like that, their main function and their main purpose would be hunting.
Yep.
And the moon, the sun affects hunting, affects fishing, affects all of those kind of things. As today, hunters use the lunar calendar and things like that when they're planning hunting. Maybe it's my suggestion.
It's not just you're suggesting it, but it's founded on this. We should say this to the audience as a disclaimer almost for what you've said there. Imagine us 16 minutes into a talk going, yeah, it could be a lunar calendar. Why would you say such a thing? Let me tell you why. Because one of the oldest Venus figurines discovered in Central Europe dating back to 30,000 BC is marked with a band with a half crescent moon with 13 notches on it. If you look on the left-hand panel right up here, there are 13 notches to be counted right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 notches. So
Yeah.
your suggestion that that's a moon calendar isn't built on whims. It's built on not numerology, but just numbers that are there and there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see. I don't see this on the right here. What I see is, while we look at the individual triangles, those sequences of triangles in the last slide, which are shown here, I wonder if we're misinterpreting this. Is perhaps the illustration on the left in Colombia is recording a moment in time or an event, but this here on the right to me, this isn't my idea, this is a French archaeologist, suggests that we shouldn't be trying to interpret the individual symbols because he thinks this could represent the forest, the hunting ground, right? So it could be a bigger pictogram art, as in it's set in an environment more so than a piece of knowledge. And within these environments, there are maybe key bits of knowledge, marking migration seasons, mating seasons. And over time, it's all been distorted. So what we're not looking at is one message. We're looking at a layer cake of developed messages over 44,000 years. But in Colombia, this is one time period, one carving effort, and it hasn't been overlaid and added to, right? That's an interesting observation between Fontainebleau and Colombia.
Definitely.
We don't have maybe 44,000 years, but there's... Oh, okay, so let's do this, Jay. Now we set the scene. Fontainebleau is perhaps most identifiable for its carvings of Pleistocene elephants, mammoths, mastodons. This is one that is agreed across the archaeological spectrum in Europe represents, for obvious reasons, a large Holocene animal, a large Holocene mastodon. It's defined as such because of this large mound on its head that protrudes out over the eye, this central hump in the back, the trunk that comes down over the nose to the length of the feet, and the eye that's been added here as a deliberation. But what's more, this hole here is where the tusk would have come out of the animal. So there's your first Fontainebleau mastodon. Second image, the second Fontainebleau mastodon. This here has much, much more detailing and scale or skin type features that have been carved into the rock, but it has the same piece. It has the bulbous skull cap, the trunk that curls down to the feet. It has the eye defined, and it has the hole here for where the trunk protrudes. We bring that into context with what we discovered on the left is J on top of a stone which we propose represents the same species as was found in the cave beside it, the Notio mastodon, the same species that is, or genus that's repeated in Fontainebleau in France. On the top of the Fontainebleau mammoth head here is a deep circular bowl called a libation bowl. On the Colombian example, on the top of the bulbous mammoth head is a circular petroglyph with a hole in the center, which we presented in the last documentary. Now, I'll pass this over to Jay, but when you look at the similarities between the shaping of the eyes on the mastodons, the hole, the almond-shaped hole in the same position relative to the eye, and the way the trunk bends forward, look at the Colombian example here. We don't have, right here, we have mastodon scale skin, sort of patchwork skin. And on here where the trunk goes over, that's used by African zoologists today to identify the age of mammoths, and it's the stretch of the front of the trunk. And that appears to be stretch at the front of the trunk, while in Fontainebleau they stylized it with this thick, heavy, almost reptilian mammoth skin. And we propose that there is the mastodon, the Notio mastodon, based on that. Jay, do you have anything you'd like to add to this image here, which is pretty striking?
I do, and you're right. It's very striking. There's an undeniable similarity between them. The ones in France, in Fontainebleau, are, as you said, unanimously accepted by all top-level academic archaeologists, and celebrated. It's a recognized site. It's had extensive exploration, excavation, and it's been detailed, perhaps more than any other site from that suggested period. The one here in Colombia, as with the petroglyphs, we have this striking similarity. It's clearly a mammoth. It has
We think it is.
We think it is, but we also have the argument and the images to perhaps give us a bit more confidence in saying it is a mammoth. The bulbous head is what? The bulbous head, also present in Fontainebleau. We know it was present on the actual animal as well. As Ashley mentioned, the skin on the nose, on the tusk, it's there. It's also present in Fontainebleau. The identifying mark on the head, now in Fontainebleau, it's got a libation bowl, as do many of the other animals in the temple that we showed in the film. This is distinctly different. This doesn't have a libation hole. It has a petroglyph, a rounded petroglyph with a circular point in the middle. For some reason, that point on top of that certain point of rock, which looks to be the crowning point on the top of its head, was significant for those people. The detail on the eyes, the detail on where the tusks would have been, the detail on the shape, the roundedness of its shoulder, it's undeniably similar to what is in Fontainebleau.
Do you know what I've realised we've been guilty of is we keep leaning into the similarities of the animal head, but look what you're standing on. The entire body's there of that mammoth, the big rounded bulbous back, and your hand is currently on what from the path looks to be the bump, the identifying bump on the back of the mammoth, doesn't it?
But the eye actually stood there on its shoulder. So again, we're coming into the argument of the dimensions, the proportions, the way it's just too perfect. And if we look at the proportions of the one here compared to the proportions of the one in Fontainebleau, they're identical.
Yeah. So there's a moment. Let's not. We don't give. I'll just say it. The skeptic to all this is fine accusing perhaps our methodologies, but what you really must do is the laborious task of showing how that example in Fontainebleau in France is definitely a mastodon, but the one in Colombia isn't, and show how each of these similarities are coincidences and that nature can perhaps do that. Maybe show us another few elephants or a few mastodons, because Jay, look, there's wee development since the last slideshow. See this? When we're up there and we're looking at it, the sun's different and it looks like a circle, but look, it's actually a spiral. See it? That spirals around and into the middle. It's a spiral carving.
That makes it even more obviously man-made.
And in Fontainebleau, dude, you're worrying me a little bit here. On several times, you keep saying it's obviously man-made. The assumption is it's man-made. We're not trying to sell to people that it's man-made. It's what are the similarities between the sculptures here? Because if we say too often, it's man-made, it's almost like we're doubting ourselves, because we said it in the first slideshow, Jay. The first live is, we have formed a front line with this discovery, and we're not going to take one step back. We're going to push this until it's been identified, predicted, and justified for what it actually is. So don't want to hear you saying it's obviously man-made again. We're going to make that assumption.
Right,
how about
let's
that?
Go for it. Let's say this.
Yep.
If the ones in Fontainebleau are man-made, the ones in Colombia are too.
You've hit it, and it's the onus on the person who detracts from that claim to show how we've misinterpreted the Fontainebleau animals in comparison to Colombia. So on to our next comparative slide, Jay. On the left is the alligator, the black Bogota caiman. We've shown the eye of the caiman that we see here. I'll just run through it quickly. We see the long body extending flat to the back. It gets to the caiman's head. They've carved a foot-deep eye by a foot wide in that part of the rock. The entire side of the face of the alligator here, or the caiman, is textured with plates, with scales like crocodile, alligator scales. Around the mouth here, you can see they've completely stopped that pattern and built or carved or laid or created vertical stones, possibly representing the teeth. The Bogota caiman is defined by its snarled top lip, which bends up round, exposing its teeth. This here, widely accepted in France, known as the Fontainebleau gator. is accepted by archaeologists as an enhanced stone shown with exactly the same features as what we propose as an alligator in Colombia. The raised eye, the long snout that goes down at an angle and comes up to the muzzle, a defining muzzle, a clear point in Colombia, and the defining muzzle here. The round bulbous part of the mouth here, and then underneath they've perhaps illustrated the mouth with that space. In Colombia, we have the mouth on our example. Jay, there's the outline. I think you should talk about this particular choice. Whereas the Mastodon had trunk stretch, this has plate armor. Go for it.
It has a very different detailed work on the stone from the Mammoth, as do all of the reptilian stones in there. Each one is distinct to its own species, but this alligator leaps out of you. Now, as you can see from the picture there, it's got some trees around it. It's got some foliage around it, some brambles, some moss on it. It leaps out. It's undeniable. And the way the eye is positioned, the eye goes, as Ash said, a foot deep. It's a foot round. You can put your hand in it.
And it's on the side, so there's no, it's not drippage.
Yeah, it's on the side of the head where it would be. And lo and behold, in exactly the same place as it is in Fontainebleau. It's also the dimensions. Now, we come back to this on the dimensions.
Yeah.
Pareidolia is interpreting something abstract in a stone. Here, we look at this and we see a crocodile, but when we compare it to the original, the actual animal, which still exists here in Bogota today, they're still alive. The dimensions and the proportions between the nose, the eye, the dip in the nose, the length of the head, the way, the distance between the top of the snout and where the snarling lip begins. It's all perfect.
I just think that last word you said is perfect. And you know, let's put that in context. You see the Colombian example in the top left. We're on the plateau. We're on a flat platform on a high hilltop. The alligator looks directly out over the ancient Paleo Lake, you know, on the level, just up, it's slightly higher than the level of the Paleo Lagoon. But and I think if archaeologists accept, and do you know something, Jay, that one on the right in Fontainebleau is relatively crude. It's like the hand of an apprentice compared to what we found in Colombia, which is like the work of a master. Look at it.
It is. Maybe it's much older than the others.
Yeah. Perhaps, you're right about that.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm burping. Let's move on to one of my favorites for sure. Our suggested horn-nosed serpent. I'll give it a wee general scan and you can maybe go into what you're doing there, Jay. This rock, which we'll come back to at the end, is mounted on 4 stones. The head comes up over the top of the eye, has a raised eye here. It's all textured over the eye. A 1 foot deep by 1.5 foot wide eye with starbursts coming out of it. The nose comes down here and it comes up to a distinct flick at the end, a horn shape carved in at the end, and it comes down here under where the snake's mouth would be. This large chunk of stone has fallen off the side. That would have represented a wider python-like jawhead. We suggest the horn-nosed viper because in Pubenza, Tibito and Alabra, horn-nosed viper specimens were found in the zoological assemblages in quantity, not just a few. That species is no longer, in the Cundinamarca region where the lake was, it's no longer existent. So we suggest horn-nosed viper, and on the right is the viper in France. Not only is the scaling texture different from the crocodile, which is different from the mammoth, it's very serpentine. But the eye, the distinction of the eye and the placement of where the mouth is, again, are both in proportion. This stone here on the other side has that wide jaw. So it's almost the same species of snake, which is mind-boggling. Jay, do you want to describe what you're doing there and why that eye, you believe, why you're so sure this is not a work of pareidolia or nature?
The eye is carved into a dip, and On a snake, it has a rounded form around its eyes, which is
Right here.
scaled, like a ridge, like a ridge of bone that stands out. It's so defined on that there's no way Mother Nature built that. Also, the tip of the nose, the way it points up, is not reminiscent or suggesting any other species of snake. There's only one that does that. And lo and behold, again, the same dimensions, the same shape on the head, the way the side jaw comes out on this piece of rock that's fallen off. It has a libation bowl on top of it as well. And as Ash mentioned, it's mounted on four, not one, not two, four smaller stones to raise it up to a certain angle. And it also has behind it, as we're going to see, a small triangular cave cut into the back of it. Comparing this to Fontainebleau, again, in Fontainebleau, this is recognized academically and accepted by leading archaeologists. It's championed by the archaeologists as one of the oldest sites from this period. It's clearly a serpentine figure. I'm no expert in reptiles and anthropology and these kind of things, but at that time, I imagine they would have had perhaps different kinds of snakes. It's definitely serpentine, and there's no question of doubt that the one here in Colombia is serpentine.
Okay. And on that, archaeologists in France, and I should say all of the archaeologists in France's reference and names that we're going to bring into this today are going to be on the description of the video with links. But they're a lot of their work in the universities in France is not trying to question whether this example on the right is a serpent or not. Their work is, if we can define the species, we can date when it was perhaps carved, when perhaps this species was the apex predator and when it subsided to another one. So I think that's why Jay and I have now become quite convinced that this here represents the horn-nosed viper that what was found in the, as I say, in the bones and the zoology that was discovered at the contemporary sites nearby. Jay, we're going to move on from this slide. We're going to come back to that. I wanted to bring this up because it shows another snake in Fontainebleau in the right. This is one of the most celebrated archaeology sites within Fontainebleau Forest. And the reason I find this one exceptionally interesting in our comparison is the eye here has been beautifully defined as a large dark hole with four almost a diamond round the eye, similar to what ours is. The mouth has been defined on both with the space underneath, but look, Jay, under here are mounting stones, granite, harder than the sandstone serpent. In Colombia, 1, 2, 3, and you can even see the stone that mounted the cheek before it fell off. It's exposed now. Perhaps that cracked off with an earthquake. The land moves every week. But look at that. Both cultures in Fontainebleau in France and in Colombia around the same time mounted serpent heads and attained horizontality. See the effort made there to get those things level. Jay, over to you for the details. Don't miss the texture on the right of the Fontainebleau cheek.
In Colombia, as in Fontainebleau, these are giant carved serpent heads mounted on smaller separate rocks. They're not just smaller separate rocks. They're different kinds of rocks that are stronger than the actual rock that they're supporting. Therefore, they're going to last longer. The carving, the scaling detail on both rocks is nearly identical.
Yep.
As we say before, and to reiterate, these ones here in Fontainebleau in France are championed by archaeologists. It's one of the oldest sites from this period forever found in the world. The similarities between these two are so striking that it opens a whole Pandora's box to other questions that perhaps we need to think about or suggest as to how this happened.
You're about to be asking them, buddy. Brace yourself.
Okay. How this happened.
Let's do it. Let's go into this. We refrained from doing it in the film. By goodness, we've thought about it, and we didn't do it in the last live stream. But those two examples beckon the question: how the hell did Ice Age cultures transport, mount, and align on the right, a rock estimated at over 200 tons, and here in Colombia, one that we estimate to be between 40 and 60 tons. They have been lifted and mounted. My first question is this, Jay.
Go on.
Is Graham Hancock right? No, I did that for the clip.
Okay. Let's leave Mr. Hancock out of this.
Indeed.
As great and as admirable as he is in his work that he does, we don't want to be entering into those realms. We're pretty confident to say here in Colombia that they floated the stones across the lake.
Yep.
Here there is a native kind of tree that is similar to bamboo called huadua, which floats and is used even today, modern times, as similar ways as bamboo would have been used. They could have floated them across, and we've seen in Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, they do similar things, floating them on reed canoes and things. That's not in question. That could have been done, and we can perhaps explain that away. How they lifted them and got them onto these smaller rocks underneath, good question. Now,
can I quickly contextualize the question and let you continue? The reason I should have said this, the reason I'm saying how, with enough hands and ropes, you can do a lot of stuff. But the thing is, under current archaeological parameters in Colombia, the cultures during the late Pleistocene, early Holocene in Colombia were 40 to 60 people rich. Elabra, 200, Tibito, 60. Who and how were these stones moved? Do you get it now?
I do, but Ash, as we can see, there is a temple and there are carved animals. There was
much more people here than we believe.
There were many more people, and they would have had to have had a group of hunters that had time and availability and enough food available to hunt the food to support these people that were doing these great megalithic projects. That suggests also hierarchy and respect and a greater motivation towards some sort of leader or some sort of greater cause for society and the people to work together in that form and to be able to look after the people, knowing that they're not hunting and you are supplying for those people. That suggests a much bigger society, a much more advanced society, a much more civilized society. And that's something that does not develop over a couple of hundred years. It takes a long time.
Disclaimer yourself and answer this. Define what you mean by advanced. Very important.
Advanced compared to the standards that they have given those people at that time.
And compared to
not advanced in modern culture. I'm not saying they had flying machines and all that. We're not going into those realms. They are more advanced, much more advanced than they are given credit for by contemporary archaeologists for that period. That's all I'm saying. They're more advanced than we give them credit for.
And more advanced than the contemporary cultures at Tibito and Elabra, because amongst all of their caves, it's only pictograms and petroglyphs that are discovered. No, these people in the thing that we're presenting monumentalized their relationship with animals in a scale much greater than even the surrounding culture. So I like to think when you mean advanced, they had advanced arts, cosmologies, worldviews, perhaps hunting methodologies. Maybe they lived on the Ice Age island that was richest in the entire savannah. But you're right, they were definitely ahead of the surrounding cultures here, for sure. But as we're showing, they weren't ahead of people in Fontainebleau. They were contemporaneous with them artistically.
Yeah. We're basing that on as well on the small amount of evidence that has been found in sites like Pubenza, Tibito, Elabra. We also must mention that these sites perhaps haven't been properly explored, and they perhaps haven't been explored for a very, very long time. So the evidence that we're basing this on with Elabra culture and their level of advancement is very limited.
Yeah. Jay, I'm going to show the audience two images on the left, which is another example of a serpent or a snake at the Colombian site. You can see it has this beautiful scaling. And what I did was I overlaid an Andean grass snake, which was existent during the Ice Age up to the end of about 7,000 BC. But look at the plating on its modern day relatives. This here, to me, is a beautiful artistic rendition of a serpent skin.
Yeah.
And
It's
you see it
identical.
done here as well in France. See it, the same styling, same thing on the cheek of this serpent. So this serpent on the left does something. What it does is it shows us that what we say was the mammoth had a different texture from what we say was the crocodile. Where the crocodile had large polygonal shaped plates, this snake has a much more rounded serpentine form, which matches the snake in France.
And
So
an
the
interesting
comparisons
detail.
are, yeah, go.
An interesting detail. This snake, compared to the other species of snake that we're saying is a horn-nosed viper, the scaling, even between the two species of the same reptile, are distinct.
Yeah. They are. Do you know, people, we're about to, in the next months, without disclosing too much, you're going to be hearing a lot more opinions from recognized archaeologists and geologists about this site. But you know what we really need in this soon is a really top quality herpetologist, a reptile expert to do.
Noah.
No, we had it in 2019. We had a guy here, but you know, now that
We
the
haven't
thing's
lost
public,
Noah.
not at all. Noah's a doctor now. Do you believe that since he graduated? He's a
I
bright
do
guy.
believe it. I do believe it. Yeah, I do. I quite believe that. Yeah.
If anybody out there has any malperceptions about the results of homeschooling and suggests children can't be socialized or brought up right, I want you all to go and look up Noah Wendrich as one of the finest examples of a human that has ever graced the planet, homeschooled, came here and helped us look at this temple and interpret the different types of turtles. Remember, that's a male turtle because of the pointy tail. That's a female because she's raised at the front. It was incredible. So we should bring one on board again. Ray, Jay, what do you reckon? Look at this, the ultimate one.
Again, there's so many similarities in the work, the stone masonry.
Go on, point them out then. Point them out. Point out the similarities.
The shape, the way the head protrudes just under the shell, the way that both of them have got a raised point as if where the legs would have come out, the detailing on the tortoise shell. Now, this again, distinct from the snake. We're not talking about scales. We're talking about plating, almost armor plating around it. Now, in Fontainebleau, they're perhaps smaller, but they're distinctly turtle-like. Perhaps two different species of the same animal in different parts of the world at different times. But they are so similar. And again, to reiterate, these ones in France, in Fontainebleau, have been academically accepted and championed for years now. There's an undeniable similarity between
them. Let's look at this here. Underneath the body or the shell of what we propose as a turtle, you have two very distinctly rounded forms shown here in the close-up in the bottom left. Look at the rounded form of the giant turtle. Now that covers a range of species from the Galapagos turtle to existing creatures here in the Ice Age that don't exist anymore. But the way they identified this as a deliberation or intentional archaeology is because of the curvature at the back here. This here was important, which is here, the flick that the animal has, which we have right here. But Jay, I think this is fascinating. Do you know what I should have said at the start was during the Younger Dryas, 11,000, 9,000 BC, Fontainebleau was a lagoon. These animals in Fontainebleau are a lagoon site as well. I think that's really important because these could be
another one to add to the list of coincidences and similarities. This is another detail that it does suggest why they would have painted or created the same species of animals. I imagine they would have been abundant at that time.
You're living in a water world of giant animals. What else are you going to sculpt?
They would have been predators and they would have been prey as well. Yeah. So they would have been important parts in their life. We're going to open Pandora's box here, actually, okay? Because there's three arguments that surround this, okay? Maybe four, but there's three arguments that surround this. One of them is this: that these people created these same similar artworks in the rocks because it's the main source they had to chisel into and to paint and to create from, and because
So you're saying they carved what they saw in their own environment. Are you suggesting option A is we're making artistically what we see?
Both cultures were influenced by the animals that they saw around them.
Okay, option B.
Option B. Now, here's where we perhaps step a little bit further into the realms of Mr. Hancock and things like this, but it's something that has to be brought up. It's something that has to be mentioned. Option B, they were taught by the same mother culture. Now, both of these sites are so similar that it's something that we cannot suggest, that we cannot avoid suggesting.
You don't say we there. I'm not with that one. So you can't say we in this.
Yeah. It's speculation, but it's something that needs to be suggested. It's one of the possibilities that we have to speculate here.
Can I ask you, Jay, is option B pretty much what Hancock says, that there was an ancient mother culture that taught both the people here and in France? Is that the idea for option B?
That's the idea for option B.
Okay.
Option C, that either somebody traveled from Colombia across the seas to France and they replicated and built the same thing, or vice versa. Someone came from France across here and they replicated the same thing. The similarities in the site, the way they show the same animals, the way they're the same dimension, and getting down to finer details, such as the libation bowls, the pond that is there, and then even finer details with the petroglyphs in the caves. The similarities between the two are so undeniable that I don't like to speculate, as you know.
Yeah.
But these are now perhaps coming into the realms where it's something we have to look at.
Can I ask you then? Can I test the logic? Just throw this. So number C. Letter C. Mm-hmm. The idea that somebody traveled because you think Fontainebleau and Colombia are so identical that somebody must maybe travel from France to Colombia, mm-hmm. and instigated the carving of a similar art style. So does that mean
vice versa from Colombia to France?
So then, based on that logic, the people who built pyramids 2,500 BC in Peru, the Paracas mm-hmm. people, they must have come from Egypt because both monuments are the same. Really?
No, if you look at those two monuments, they're actually aligned to Orion, and that you can say that those cultures were influenced by the heavens. They were both seeing the same shapes in the heavens at the same time. I've also suggested it here that these two cultures were seeing the same animals at the same time, so they did the same thing. But we can break it down to finer details. When you look at a pyramid in Peru or wherever, it does not have Egyptian hieroglyphs inside it. If you look,
I know, but that was saying then that logic suggests option A is the right one, which is if
when we're
both
coming
people
down,
can build pyramids that are exactly the same in two different continents at the same time, and they were influenced by the heavens. Don't you think option A is the valid one then, which is people in France at that time were going through the same changes during the Younger Dryas, albeit cooling down in France, warming up in Colombia, but they were seeing the same depletion of megafauna and reptiles, food, the same changing climate and their environment, the geology, flooding, and therefore expressed their environment in stone, the same in the same two countries. Don't you think that outweighs the idea of somebody traveling 12,000 miles, crossing all of Venezuela, most of Colombia, and then coming here and going carve that? That would take generations of the transmission of an artistic style. That wouldn't just be one guy, right? 30 years ago.
It would show a combination of the cultures. But going back to your point, there's a pyramid in Peru, there's a pyramid in Egypt. We haven't found a pyramid in Egypt or a pyramid in Peru or anywhere like that has Egyptian hieroglyphs inside. Here we've got two sites that are very, very, very similar. And inside the cave, we've got hand-carved petroglyphs that are almost identical, which I would say would be similar to finding Egyptian hieroglyphs around a Peruvian site. That someone had that same level of communication and ability to extract that information from those same carvings would suggest that they were taught by the same person. Writing and carving stones or communicating through petroglyphs or any form of written material is very different from carving stone.
I get it, but the average lifespan was 30 years old. So one person who was born in France got to 15 or 20 years old. And even if you can imagine a 20-year-old was a master of this craft and style, that person then has got from 20 to 30 to travel to Colombia across the Atlantic and then Venezuela.
10 years.
Or is it transmission? His son went 10 miles further. They went, but anyway, let's not get into that because the thing is, I should make clear. But I should make clear here. Yeah, Jay's ABC that he laid out there is not particularly his own personal beliefs. What he's showing are the three options that it can be.
Yeah.
But I would default in ourselves, just for the sake of moving on, we'd probably lean into option A more than the I, because the thing is, a lot of our audience believe that we've missed the mark here. That the fact we didn't say they were the same people that carved the stained stones leaves us as idiots. How could you possibly think these were different people? So I get that.
It's too speculative. We have to stay within the realms of possibility, and without any further supporting evidence, we cannot claim that B and C are right. We cannot claim that A is right as well, because honestly, we don't know. We are saying it's the most valid and most acceptable point at the moment. That could change tomorrow. That could change. We could go and find another site here and further explore it and find.
Well, history would have to change tomorrow.
Or identical, a place in front. We're basically leaning towards the idea and the theory that is most acceptable without entering realms of speculation.
Absolutely, because history would have to change to say there was Younger Dryas transatlantic, and that's why
what we're here for, man. We're here to do that. We're here to do that without speculation and with evidence and solid arguments.
This changes history without us having to say that they were the same people. But I think it's the comparisons with the Fontainebleau animals is where the intrigue lies, and it doesn't mean to say we're trying to stitch the two together, but what we're showing is what we're really more so trying to do than even suggest these are common culture is show that if archaeologists in France accept these Fontainebleau sculptures as bona fide Ice Age animals, then why not these identical examples in Colombia? Show us why one is handmade and why one is not. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I'd say that anyone that wants to say that these ones in Colombia are not what we say they are, then reinvestigate the ones in Fontainebleau. The ones in Fontainebleau must also not be what they say they are.
That's right. So you're telling
if these are archaeologically accepted and they're identical, then it's like going back to your argument. It's like we find a pyramid in Egypt, and we find one in Peru, and we say, "Oh, this one in Peru is not a pyramid."
Sure,
it's identical. Therefore, it has to be a pyramid. It has the same dimensions. How would you identify? How did we identify these pyramids in Peru the same as the ones in Egypt? By their shape and their dimensions. The same as we are doing now to propose our argument to compare these to the ones in Fontainebleau. If these ones in Fontainebleau are archaeologically accepted and championed for academics, the ones in Colombia are too. There's no question.
Yeah, and detractors have not. I mean, it's easy enough for the academic community to point the academic shotgun downwards and put two in our heads. But if you're putting us out, you've got to put out 150 years of French archaeologists at the same time. They're all wrong too, is the point, right? And that's another example of how we've defined our front line and we've taken one step back because we believe, no, we don't believe, we have evidence to suggest we are bang on with what we're proposing here. And it's not a point of ego, it's a point of excitement because this is the first time arts have been found in France with zoological animals to match them, and that animals have been found in caves in Colombia, and now we've shown the arts to match them. This is very rare to find bones of animals and then artistic expressions of animals anywhere in history. And we were claiming that this dates back to the Ice Age lagoon line 10,400 BC, because we know Labra was populated then, and they were hunting all of the animals we showed you today.
There's archaeological evidence to prove it.
Yeah. This here, Jay, is equally as important as the animals to me. On the left are a range of libation bowls that have been identified by indigenous people that have worked with us in the primary stages of this. They showed us this libation bowl where rituals were made. We even found corn floating in it, tobacco around it, which they put into the bowls before they climb up the mountains to ask for a good passage from the mountain god, the Opus. But look at those bowls on predominant miradors or long rocks in Colombia, and then the example in Fontainebleau in France. And what's interesting about the French Fontainebleau site is that there are other libation sites in Fontainebleau, but that's called the libation bowl because it's on the lagoon line. See those trees? They were underneath the lagoon in France during the Younger Dryas. So this overlooks the lagoon. What do all ours do here in Colombia? They're out over the lagoon. It's almost an obsession with water rituals. It's been shown in both countries in front of their main hunting lake. Jay, over to you for more observations.
These are more of what I call the defining details, where we have two parks. We have one in Fontainebleau, one in Colombia. They've got big animals. Okay. All those animals lived at the same time. Yeah. The fact that they took the time to do, again, using the word, nearly identical libation bowls in the same places, looking out over the same direction. And if we look at the dimensions of these ones in Fontainebleau, how far away they are from the end of the rock, the depth of them, the fact that one side is higher than the other, allowing the water to run down. Again, looking at these and saying the same with the petroglyphs we found in the cave, they do look like they've been done by the same people. It does look that way. They're very similar designs, and the two cultures in two independent parts of the globe at perhaps two independent time periods would do the same animal and then take the time to carve the same libation bowl into the same point of that animal. For me, that pushes the realms of coincidence.
Okay, realms
of coincidence, just a bit too far for me, man.
So can I test that logic?
Go for it.
There's loads of libation bowls found from this date in Russia, Siberia, Australia. So for you to say it's coincidence that these two match, how do you count for all the other ones that match?
Are the ones in Russia carved into the heads of giant animals and mammoths and reptiles? There you go.
All right, I tested it. That's fair enough. That's a fair rebuttal. I could go further, but I'm not going to. I know when I lost. All right, so I take the L and you take the win. Let's go here. This is our last slide, Jay. This is fantastic for me. It's probably the most apparently insignificant piece of archaeology at the site in Colombia, but it's celebrated in France. And this is what I mean here. On the back of the large horn-nosed serpent's head, on the left-hand side here is a small V-shaped cave, which you can see has been burned in for a long, long time. But in Fontainebleau in France, they were able to find charcoal remains that dated the sculptures and the site and these caves and different layers of when it was used ritually, going all the way back to about 30,000 BC up to the Bronze Age. That cave was reused. If somebody said to me, well, they actually have recently, as you know, which part of this site would you like to see excavated? I would actually choose that fire because it has the most chance of giving us charcoal or organic material to date the site, mate. What's your thoughts yourself?
I would agree with you. It's a great place to excavate. If we ever come to that and we get permission to do that, yeah, definitely. Also inside the caves, man, inside those rock shelters and around them.
Yeah.
Has to be. This, now, again, we're coming back to the defining details. Let's break this down. We've got two giant rocks, one in France, one in Colombia. Both of them have been texturized with serpentine scales and appear to look like serpents. Again, both of the rocks, both of them have been mounted on top of smaller rocks in both sites, in France and in Colombia. Those same mounted rocks that appear to look like serpents in Colombia and in France, both of them have this small cave, which is nearly the same size, carved in exactly the same place at the back of the rock. Now,
Right. So,
again, talking about stretching the realms of coincidence here, man.
okay.
This is something between the two sites that is a detailed, that's just too detailed, man. Maybe the petroglyphs, yeah, they were seeing the same things. The animals, they're seeing the same things. This is a detail that perhaps, why would they do that in the same place, on the same animal and the same mounted rock? The thing that springs to my mind is that same animal and that same rock would have had the same significance and, looking at the fire, spiritual significance for both of those cultures.
Right. Okay. Let me see where I'm going to come at you. Right. So what about all the other commonalities between snakes? What I mean by that, Jay, is both cultures perhaps identified the really hard medicinal qualities of snake oil. Perhaps both knew that it was a wonderful thing to combust, to burn, and that is where they extracted snake oil from snakes behind the snakes' heads. For example, there could be more commonalities rather than, this is evidence of the same person. What's your thought on that?
Why? I would say that's pure speculation. Perhaps it's a nice idea, but that we could ever prove that they used to take snake oil from the snakes behind the
it's easier to prove that than it is to say that a guy hopped on a boat across the Atlantic during the Ice Age.
I'm not saying that someone hopped on a boat and went across the Atlantic. I gave you the three theories, but if we're coming down to theory A, which is the one we lean towards, that they saw the same things, the same environment, the same animals that had the same importance in their life
and same properties.
Why cut this triangular cave in the back of the snake and take the time to mount that head on those smaller rocks? I cannot think of any other reason to answer that. And if anyone there in the chat has any ideas, please come on, give them to us. We're kind of at a loss on this one. And it's something that does really relate the two sites together. It's more than, they both look like an elephant, or they both got pictograms, they've both got libation holes. This is coming down to 3 or 4 defining details on one rock: the scaling, the eye, the mounting, and the cave at the back. I mean, how many points of similarity do we need? The species. How many points of similarity do we need for it not to be a coincidence?
A lot more.
Let's keep looking then, man.
Yeah, because so many thousands of really bright people from all walks of science, geologists, archaeologists, anthropologists, have lived for the last 150 years dedicating their lives to looking for evidence that there might have been Paleolithic transatlantic contact. Nobody has found anything, and I just think it is way beyond my realms of comfortable for me to say.
Okay,
well, but we might have.
It's just suggesting. Here, though,
it's a theory that exists. That it's a hypothesis, because I asked you for what you said. ABC. So there are only 3 ways that these similarities could exist. I get that, and it is pure hypothesis. A is the only one that could stand up, which is
within realms of current scientific and archaeological knowledge.
That's right. But you're right. It becomes really interesting when you get 5 or 6 points of coincidence that already, if you and I were of different minds, we'd be selling books about this, having discovered the Hancockian lost advanced civilization or the mother culture. But those are options B and C, right? Because
they're not for us to they're suggestions, and it's things that people have been saying to us, that have suggested to us.
But people are convinced.
They're worth mentioning, and they are options that are not outside the realms of possibility, and they do explain that. Coming back to something that is a very valid point here. This rock, this one that has this carving at the back, this mounted snake in Fontainebleau, this is one of the defining stones there that shows that it was worked by man and that it's man-made. We have the same in Colombia, so we must have that same seal on this one in Colombia. It's the same. We have to judge it by the same standards as Fontainebleau.
Yeah. hunter-gatherers surviving, building fires to keep warm. Why would they make it any bigger than they needed it? That's enough for 3 people to sit in front of. I get you. But what's important is that we do show there are lots of points of not just comparison, but there's points of bizarre coincidence as well. Beyond comparison, we're not trying to allude to that, suggesting something fantastical. We're just highlighting the fact that there are
We're not suggesting there's more coincidence, but there is an abundance of coincidences.
That's right. That's right. And these all need to be mapped out. That's the plans. We're not going to talk about what's going to happen here. We're just going to ask you to keep an eye on this channel for the next few months. And, you know, Jay, we're going to bring this to an end now. We're at kind of our last slide. But I think I want to tell the audience that Jay and I have been in the field several times since we published that last documentary, accounting for our last 6 years. And next Tuesday, we're going to be releasing, we're going to call it the second part of the Reptile Temple documentary, because we have furthered our explorations along the ancient 10,400 BC Paleo Lake shoreline, and we have found more incredible, let's just say, archaeological objects to share with you in a film on Tuesday without divulging a single thing. So keep your eye here and you'll see how this whole thing unfolds and grows and expands and takes shape, and watch how we eventually, over the months, extrapolate the coincidences from the environmental effects, the artistic styles that appear to be the same, and both why they're the same. Perhaps the discovery in Colombia can inform archaeologists in France more about the meaning of the sculptures there if they find them in a separate setting. So this is all coming. So keep an eye on the channel, on the live streams, and Tuesday is the next step forward. Jay, I'll put it over to you to say thanks to the audience and we'll wrap her up.
Thanks to everyone for joining us. Ash, thank you, mate. It was a pleasure as always. We're very appreciative of the people that have supported us, that have joined in, and always for joining in the chats and taking your time to follow us. As Ash said, we've got some new things to come, and we will be going back out into the field, and we will be continuing to explore and to bring you and show you the evidence that we are finding.
We'd always intended during filming over the 5-6 years to format the film in a really true chronological order from start to end, and we were really honorable to that in the first film. And you know, you would be thinking to yourself, why, if they've got a series of discoveries in Colombia, why would they show us this reptile temple in the first one? It's because a year ago we realized the reptile temple is not the holy grail here. It is the first step in a really, really expansive archaeological site environment that we're going to slowly unfold with everybody. But yeah, the reptile temple marks ground zero for everything that's about to come, as spectacular as it is, and it makes it a bold claim what I've just said. But what we present on Tuesday, while it's not got the same quantity of animals as the reptile temple, is perhaps one of the most spectacular examples we've found, right, Jay?
Quality over quantity.
Yeah, gee whiz, exactly. Well, the quantity was in the first was, 12 or 18 arguably animal heads. This here, what's coming on Tuesday, is
it's a quality.
It takes the word precision to another level, okay? The rendering of what one might have seen at that time period. And remember, not just because it's on the lake line and it's contemporaneous with the Labra, but it's these sites, we should remind, are some of the earliest archaeological sites in the Americas. They're in the top 10 for the Americas. So we know those people were here. We know they were in the valley, but what we're kind of seeing is that they had a richer understanding and a ritualized way of living with the animals that they hunted, right?
The culture and the communities that they would have had would have been far more developed. I'm not going to say advanced, because it could be misinterpreted. More developed and more hierarchical than perhaps anyone's given them credit for.
Yeah, so, arts comes downstream from culture, Jay.
Yeah.
And, for these sculptures to exist, there had to have been a long period of time before it developing the styles and the
it's not something that
inspiration.
As we've seen in what the previous cradle of civilization, which was Sumeria. We've seen that now, obviously it's Göbekli Tepe, but we're history wrong again, had to be corrected, had to be rewritten. But as we've seen in these cradles of civilization that have come up independently in Bolivia, in Titicaca, in Sumeria, in Turkey, in Africa, in Asia as well, where they've initiated it. It takes time for them to flourish. It's not something that happens overnight. It's something that is human nature that takes us that time to learn, to live together, to dedicate time to these things, and to have separate groups supporting each other in the society does not happen overnight. And if this was happening here at this time period, it suggests a longer period of time before that for those to have developed that level of what we refer today as civilization.
Yeah, I hate the word. Yeah,
it's a very
the reason coming
word.
back to the to our very opening line. Why would we be so audacious enough to call it to say, does this temple challenge the antiquity of Göbekli Tepe? There's one clear observation we didn't cover in this live, but we always consider is this: Göbekli Tepe shows the transition from hunter-gatherer fisher to agriculturalist, and it shows domesticated animals. But it was clearly built by a culture emerging through the Younger Dryas. The one in Colombia was 8,000 years before the first agriculture. So it is a standalone, non-agriculturalist, Younger Dryas, hunter-gatherers, fishers temple. And that makes it unique with everything, right?
Yeah, unique on this earth, man.
Yeah, because we're saying that if the archaeologists are right in Colombia that they were living in groups of between 40 and 80 people, who then needed such a large ritual site? Who then built, maneuvered? And so anyway, we're going to be unfolding all this over the next weeks. I'll just sign it off, Jay, and say live stream's coming to an end. I'd like to say a quick thank you to Jen, who was admin in there. And as people watch this over the next weeks, I'm sure Jen will be in contact with you, sending you links to some of the other bits and pieces that you might ask about. We like to serve here on History Fuzz. And if you have questions, we don't just give you the standard AI automated response. We'll post links and we'll steer you in the right direction. We like to think everything we claim and say can be backed up by previous research we've published or by other people's. And if you want any of it, go into the show notes for this live or anything that you need further information on today in either Fontainebleau and Colombia. So on that note, thank you. And we'll see you next week for another live stream after we publish the film on Tuesday. Cheers. There we go, Jay.